Hello, viewers. Welcome to Literary Concepts. Today's topic is the Middle English period. Now, let us try to understand the Middle English period. Introduction. The Middle English period marks the evolution of English language from Old English into a more recognizable form of modern English. So, Middle English period marks, so that is the development of, during this Middle English period we find the evolution, the gradual development of English language from Old English into modern English. This era follows the Norman conquest of England in 1066 and spans roughly from 1066 AD to 1500 AD, where we find a significant cultural, linguistic, and political changes. So, this Middle English period follows after the Norman conquest of England happened in 1066 AD, and the length, okay, the period spans from 1066 to 1500. During this time we find the significant changes in cultural, linguistic, and political aspects. So it saw the rise of English vernacular in literature. During the Middle English period, we find the development of, okay, the rise of English vernacular. Vernacular means the native language in English literature. So, and at the same time, we also see the influence of both Norman French language and Anglo-Saxon tradition on literature during Middle English period. So during this period, many of the greatest works of English literature were created. So we find many greatest works during Middle English period, including Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. This is introduction about Middle English period. Now let us try to understand some of the cultural and historical context, okay, or events which happened during Middle English period. The number one is the Norman conquest, which was happened in 1066. So the Norman conquest led to the establishment of Norman French as a language of ruling class. The Norman French language was considered as a language of ruling class during this time, whereas Old English remained the language of common people during Middle English period. So the influence of Norman French and English is one of the defining features in the Middle English period. We find the influence of Norman French language on Middle English, okay, on Middle English during this time. The second event which was happened during this time was the Black Death because of the disease, the plague. So that was happened between 1347 to 1351. The plague, the disease plague, had profound effects on literature. So this Black Death event so had a profound effect on literature, and you find that that prompted, okay, that led to the reflections on life, death, and the meaning of existence. So you find the themes on life, death, and the meaning of existence in Middle English period literature. And the third event which was happened, that is 100 years war from 1337 to 1453. So it was a prolonged conflict between England and France that influenced national identity. So this 100 years war happened between England and France nations. So it was a lengthy conflict, and the war is reflected in literature. Okay, the influence of war is reflected in literature, particularly in the works of historical and military fictions. These were the historical context or historical events which happened during Middle English period. Now let us try to understand the characteristics or the features of Middle English period. Number one is language evolution. So that is Middle English. So we find Middle English emerged as a result of the blending, the combination of Old English, so which was spoken by the Anglo-Saxons, and Norman French language introduced by Normans after their conquest. So the Middle English was emerged because of the combination of both Old English and Norman French languages. So Middle English was used for writing literature during this time, but Latin remained language of religion and education. Okay, so Middle English was used for writing literature, but Latin remained the language of religion and education during this time. The second feature is the rise of the middle class. So during this Middle English period, we find there was a growing middle class, which was reflected in literature. You find that middle class, the prominence of middle class, the significance of middle class was reflected in literature as the common people gained more social and economic power. The common people, okay, the general people, the general audience gained more social and economic power during this time, and their voices began to be represented in literary works. So, therefore, that expands the scope of the literary genres during Middle English period. The next feature or a characteristic is the rise of vernacular literature. Vernacular means the native tongue, the native tongue, the everyday, whatever the language which we use, the common people language, understand the native speech, everyday language is used in literature to write literature. The Middle English period saw the growth of vernacular literature, the native literature in English as opposed to the Latin or French, which had been dominant during that time. Latin language and French language were dominant. Okay, uh, as opposed to them, the vernacular literature, the native literature was uh, developed. Okay, so this made literature more accessible to a broader audience. So because of this native literature, understand, so the literature is more accessible to the reach to more okay audience, more people. So especially emerging merchant and urban classes, understand, merchant and urban classes people it reached. So writers began to experiment with and develop Middle English as a literary language. The writers also, they began to experiment and they developed Middle English as a literary language. That is how the rise of vernacular literature took place during Middle English period. The next characteristic is religious influence. We find the religious influence more on literature. So, particularly, the Catholic Church had a significant influence on the medieval society. So we find the influence of Catholic Church on the people during Middle English period. Much of the literature of the period was religious. Whatever the literature was produced, so it was a bit related to religious. So where we find sermons, understand in literature we find the sermons. Sermons means that is talks on religious or moral subjects, okay, devotional writings and the biblical translations. Okay, the Bible translations we find during this time. The next feature is romance and chivalric literature. So chivalric means nobility, bravery or courage acts. So we find the romance, during the Middle English period. Romance dominated, with stories focusing on the adventures of knights. Knights means great warriors of olden times. Understand the old times warriors who work for uh, the king. Okay, so their adventures, their brave acts, we find in literature the ideals of courtly love, the virtues of honor, the goodness of honor, bravery, and loyalty. These themes we find in Middle English period. Okay, the Arthurian legend was particularly important during this time. We find that Arthurian legends. So many romances, many stories were written about King Arthur and his knights and his warriors. Understand? So romance and chivalric action, okay, themes we find in literature during Middle English period. The next one is allegory. So allegory means a symbol, okay, a symbolical representation. Middle English literature was allegorical. Much of the Middle English literature was allegorical, with characters representing, so that is symbolically representing abstract concepts such as virtues and vices. So different concepts were represented. Okay, the concepts like virtues, goodness, and vices, the badness. Moral allegories were popular. During this time, we find moral allegories during Middle English period. Often teaching lessons about, so in these moral allegories, we find more, okay, themes about Christian morality, human nature, and the consequences of actions, our actions. So these themes we find in Middle English works, Middle English literature works. These are the characteristics of Middle English period. Next, now let us try to understand major writers and works of Middle English period. The first writer is Geoffrey Chaucer. So his lifespan 1343 to 1400. His important works. Now let us try to understand his important works. The very popular one is, the first one is the Canterbury Tales. So it is a collection of 24 stories. Canterbury Tales is a collection of 24 stories. So that runs over to 17,000 lines. The Canterbury Tales was written over 17,000 lines in written in Middle English between 1387 and 1400, between 1387 to 1400 by Geoffrey Chaucer. So these stories were told by pilgrims. Okay, the pilgrims, the travelers, traveling to Canterbury. Where they are traveling to Canterbury. Understand? So representing cross section of medieval society. All these pilgrims, the travelers, represents the medieval society people. This work, so this Canterbury Tales, okay, combination of satire, blend means combination of satire, humor, and moral lessons. So where that capturing, focusing more the complexities of human nature and social structure of the Middle English period. Okay, we find satire, we find humor and moral lessons, so which describe the complexities of human nature. Okay, which brings out the complexities of the difficulties of human nature, understand, and the social structure, the society of Middle English period. So it is one of the most important works of Middle English period. Canterbury Tales is one of the most important works of the Middle English period, and it is often seen as a precursor to the Renaissance. So it is often considered as a pioneer to the Renaissance. The next work is Troilus and Cressida. So it was a tragic love story set during the Trojan War, which was written in 1385, and the Troilus and Cressida explores the themes of love, fate, and betrayal. These themes we find in Troilus and Cressida: love, fate, and betrayal. The next work is the Book of the Duchess, so which was written in 1369. So it was a dream vision poem. It was a dream vision poem. It was a poem which reflects Chaucer's mourning for the death of Blanche of Lancaster. Okay, Blanche of Lancaster. So this poem, the dream vision poem, the Book of Duchess, reflects, okay, reflects the mourning, Chaucer's mourning, the Chaucer's sorrow, the Chaucer's sadness for the death of Blanche of Lancaster. Lancaster. The next one is, okay, the House of Fame and the Parliament of Falls. The House of Fame and the Parliament of Falls. So these works explore dreams, fame, and nature of love and politics. In the House of Fame and Parliament of Fowls, we find the themes like dreams, fame, and nature of love and politics. These are the important works, okay, of Geoffrey Chaucer. So Chaucer is often called as the father of English literature. So you have to remember this. The Chaucer is often called the father of English literature, and the Canterbury Tales is considered one of the greatest literary works in the English language, marking the transition of English from vernacular to a respected literary language. Understand? So it is the Canterbury Tales considered as the greatest literary works of English language, which where that we find the transformation of English from vernacular, from native language to the respected literary language. The second writer is Sir Thomas Malory. Sir Thomas Malory, 1415 to 1471, his lifespan, and his important work is Le Morte d'Arthur. Okay, Le Morte d'Arthur, which was written in 1485. It is a compilation of stories about King Arthur. Le Morte d'Arthur is a compilation of, okay, it is a collection of stories about King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, and the quest for Holy Grail. The text combines the legends of Arthur and his knights. So we find the stories about the King Arthur and his different warriors. Understand, knights means warriors, providing a comprehensive narrative of chivalric values. Understand? So we find that chivalric values, a complete narration of the chivalric nobility. Okay, the brave values, the bravery values, noble values, the conflict between good and evil. We also find this, the conflict, okay, the clash between good and evil, and the ultimate fall of Camelot. The ultimate fall of Camelot. So these things we find in Lee Mortimer Arthur. Understand? The next writer is William Langland. So his lifespan is 1332 to 1386 AD. His important work is Piers Plowman. Okay, Piers Plowman. So it is an allegorical narrative. It is a symbolical representation of narration that critiques, okay, that analyzes, assesses medieval society, religion, and quest for salvation. So that is a quest, search for salvation. Understand? saving. So it tells the story of Will. Okay, Pierce Plowman tells the story of Will, the protagonist. The Will is the protagonist, the important character who seeks the truth through a series of dreams and allegorical encounters. The poem is this Pierce Plowman. Okay, Pierce Plowman is a poem. Okay, the poem is religious and socially critical, exploring the themes of virtue, corruption, and the quest for a just society. It is a religious poem and a socially critical one, and we also find okay themes like virtue, corruption, and the quest for just society, equal society, justice. Understand? Equal society. These are the themes which we find in Pierce Plowman. Plowman. The next writer is the Perel poet. So 1350 to 1400. His important works. The first one is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So during 1375 to 1400, it was a chivalric romance. Understand? A chivalric romance and an allegorical tale that explores the themes of honor, bravery, and testing of virtue through the characters of Sir Gawain, who is challenged by the mysterious Green Knight. Okay, so it was a tale, a story where that we find the themes like honor, bravery, and testing of virtue, testing about the goodness. Okay, through the character of Sir Gawain, who is challenged by the mysterious, a strange Green Knight. Understand? The next one is peril, patience, and cleanliness. So, peril, patience, and cleanliness are the poems are part of a series often referred to as peril manuscript. So, these are the poems where we find in peril manuscripts. So, these are part of a series. So, these three series are called peril manuscript. Exploring religious themes, we find religious themes such as faith, patience, and purity. So, faith, loyalty, patience, and purity, these themes we find in the poem, in these poem, peril, patience, and cleanliness. They are rich in allegory and moral lessons. We find, okay, allegories and moral lessons in these poems. The Perel poet is known for his mastery of alliterative words. So the Perel poet is famous for his mastery, the uses of okay alliterative words and complex symbolism. And Sir Gawain and the Green Knight remains one of the greatest Arthurian legends. So it is this is importance of the feral poet, the significance of feral poet. Now the next writer is John Gower. So John Gower lifespan 1332 1408, and his important works. Number one is Confessio Amentis. Confessio Amentis 1390. So it was a moralistic allegory in which the protagonist Amans confesses to a priest genius about his sins and relationship. So the protagonist of this Confessio Amentis was Amans. He confesses, he accepts his sins, his wrongs, okay, his mistakes and relationships to a priest called Genius. The work addresses the nature of love and morality. So, this work addresses the nature of love and morality and includes numerous stories drawn from classical mythology and history. So we find different stories which were drawn from mythology and history, and always okay in this Confessio Amentis we find uh, it addresses the nature of love and morality. So these themes we find in Confessio Amentis. One more work of John Gower is Vox Clementis, which was written in 1377. The next writer is Julian of Norwich. Julian of Norwich, the lifespan was 1342 to 1416. The major work of Julian of Norwich, Revelations of Divine Love, which was written in 1395. Revelations of Divine Love. And Julian of Norwich was an important mystical writer. Important mystical writer. Julian of Norwich was an important religious or spiritual writer. Her work, that is, Revelations of Divine Love, offers profound, strong, great influence, the insights into her spiritual experiences and theological reflections. So we find a great, a deeper understanding of her spiritual experiences and theological, so that is religious and divinely reflections. Her writings, that is Julian of Norwich, are noble for their deep spirituality. You find more spiritual means a sacred, holy, religious, divine related matters, and their emphasis on divine love, godly love, and compassion, that is caring and empathy. So these are the important writers and their works of Middle English period. So I hope you understand the Middle English period concept. So thank you.